Get yourself some rainbow cables, and I don't mean the ones with the rainbow colored ends, I mean the full rainbow cables. They're not just for looking pretty, although that's a bonus. When you got a full drum kit mic'd up, being able to tell your stone drummer, hey, pass me the blue cable, is a whole lot easier than having them follow this black tangled mess on the ground to see which cable's plugged into the kick drum mic. Get yourself some of these. Although not as good as rainbow cables, they allow you to label all of your power cords so you actually know what you're unplugging, and I also use them to label the cables going in and out of my interface and analog equipment. Get yourself some cable ties. They allow you to keep your cables organized when you're not using them, and also make them shorter if they're too long. Buy longer cables than you think. Always longer than you think. Say your interface is 20 feet from the snare drum mic. This is what buying a 20-foot cable looks like. This is what buying a 25-foot cable looks like. Even 30 feet might not be long enough, because what if the guitarist wants the drummer to back up a couple feet? It is better to have too long of a cable than a cable that doesn't reach. But if the mic cable you have is still too short, mic cables can plug into other mic cables. While we're on this cable thing, it's always a cable. It's either broken or not plugged in where it should be. Learn to wrap a cable. Let's compare a properly wrapped cable to how you might be wrapping your cables. This is how I wrap mine, which I heard is kind of a weird way to do it, but it works. Avoid buying gear with built-in cables. I love my Vic Firth drumming headphones, but the most likely part of it to break is the cable, and once that happens, the whole thing is dead. Compare that to my Hyphemans, where I can use any length cable I want, and I don't have to be worried about the most fragile component of it breaking. These headphones are their own piece of advice later in the video, so stick around for that. Learn your cable connector types: TRS, TS, XLR, RCA, aux, MIDI, SPDIF, ADAT, USB A, B, and C, and Thunderbolt. These cables might be data versus audio, female versus male, mono versus stereo. Learn all of these and their functions, and you can save yourself some headaches. On stereo cables, the red one is the right channel because they both start with R, and the white one is the left channel because it's the other one. Understand the difference between mic, instrument, line, and amp level signals. Super quick lesson. Mic level is super quiet, and it's the actual current that is generated by the capsule of the microphone, which needs a preamp to be usable. Instrument level is similar. It's the current generated by guitar pickups, but it's a little louder than mic level. Next is line level, which is the typical strength that power devices use and expect. A preamp's job is to take a mic or an instrument level signal and boost it to line level. And finally, amp level is a signal amplified to the point where it's strong enough to power a speaker on its own, with no other source of power. These can reach potentially dangerous levels of current. Understand the true difference between analog and digital. It seems a lot of people think that analog just means it's got big knobs on it, but understanding where your signal is data and where your signal is electricity is super useful. Another quick lesson. Digital data is not sound. It is instructions for how to build sound. The same way that written English is instructions for spoken language. When I speak into this mic, analog signals travel down the cable, get boosted by my preamp, and then enter my audio interface, which has an analog to digital converter in it, which translates it into digital data. Ones and zeros. It stays digital as I do all my video editing and upload this video to the servers and you click on the video, but then the digital data is converted back to analog audio by your interface or your AirPods digital to analog converters before that analog audio can be sent to the speakers. While we're talking about the digital world, let's talk about basic digital hygiene. Build systems for your files and stick to them. Don't save everything to your desktop. Have a dedicated drive with an organized file structure that keeps your projects neat and tidy. Keep free space on your drive and don't let clutter build up. Musicians have a bit of a reputation for acting spontaneously when inspiration strikes, but maybe not being the best at staying organized and cleaning up after ourselves. Of course, nobody likes working in a dirty studio, but a cluttered digital space can be just as damaging for musicians. Especially when inspiration strikes, it's crucial to have a fast, organized file system without bloat, duplicate files, or background apps secretly hogging up processing power. To help with this, I'd like to introduce this video's sponsor, Clean My Mac, an award-winning app designed to tackle maintenance issues so you don't even have to think about your computer while making music. For instance, Space Lens allows me to visualize what's taking up space on my drive. I can see here that my video creation folder is a little bigger than it should be, and look at that. It's because I still have my behemoth Hairchild video on my work drive, not my archive drive. My clutter mode is interesting, especially for musicians. It looks for duplicate files and similar images that you might have in multiple locations. Cleaning up these files will optimize your storage space and ensure that your DAW references the correct files. And cloud cleanup is fantastic. I know a lot of us use cloud storage as a quick way to back up a project or send something to a colleague, but oftentimes we don't remember to get rid of these old files once they're redundant, and we end up paying for more cloud storage than we actually need. Cloud cleanup looks through your iCloud Drive, Dropbox, and Google Drive, all of which I use for various reasons, and finds duplicates and outdated files that you might want to get rid of. All these tools work together to keep your Mac healthy. You push the sound, Clean My Mac watches the system. Get tidy today. Try 7 days free and use my code ROAN for 20% off. Thank you to Clean My Mac for supporting the channel. Now, on the same vein of digital hygiene, A backup solution. Do not keep only one version of your files. Drives fail, and there's no shortage of horror stories from musicians who have lost everything because they didn't have a backup. This happened to a friend of mine, and it was so sad, especially because it was preventable. I use Apple's Time Machine to back up my files to a hard drive, which I keep in a safe location. Editing Roan here. I shit you not, as I'm editing this video, this exact segment about needing a backup solution got deleted somehow, and the thing that saved the day was my Time Machine drive. I recommend getting a hard drive for this instead of an SSD for a few reasons. They're cheap, they don't really need to be fast, and they fail more predictably. SSDs tend to just randomly stop working, and they're incredibly hard to recover data from. Hard drives can start to show signs of poor health before failing, and can be easier to recover from. Also, make sure that your backup drive is at least twice the size of the drives that you're backing up, as Time Machine saves multiple copies of your files. Speaking of disaster prevention, your hearing. You already know you shouldn't mix too loud, I'm not going to belabor that point. However, if you want to protect your hearing, you should not be going to concerts without earplugs. Whether it's these foam things or those fancy loops, get them and put them in your ears. Concerts is the obvious one, but depending on your line of work or other hobbies, you might be at dangerous volumes more than you think. Do not raw dog the drums. There should never be a clear path between a stick hitting a drum and the sound hitting your eardrum. Whether you're the guitarist tracking next to the drummer or you are the drummer, protect your ears. Now, if you are the drummer and you need to use headphones while tracking, normal headphones won't cut it. It's not because the drums will damage your ears through the headphones, it's because you'll have to crank the volume of the backing track to dangerous levels to be able to hear over the drums. These SIH3s. These Vic Firth SIH3s have allowed me to play my backing tracks at a lower volume because they reject the sound of the drums so well. Not only is the rejection so good, but they also sound weirdly good for the price. Also, I bought these with my own money. Vic Firth is not sponsoring me, unless they'd like to be. Don't use Q-tips. Get one of these spoon things and use it regularly. Even at quieter volumes, hearing stress is cumulative and usually takes a few days to reset. Think of it like your muscles. Even if you're only jogging, if you jog for long enough, you're gonna get sore. Try to space out your listening, and that means taking frequent breaks throughout the day, but also giving your ears full days off. A quick anecdote, I was producing a close friend of mine and we had blocked out a few days to record a whole album, and this meant tracking and listening on speakers for 12 hours a day, multiple days in a row. Even though we were watching our volumes, by the fourth day, our ears were too fatigued to continue, and we had to call an end to the session. Looking back, more frequent breaks and perhaps a few rest days in between could have kept us going for longer. You might be in an acoustically treated space designed to minimize reflections. This can trick your brain into thinking that the sound coming out of the speakers is quieter than it actually is. Mixing quietly doesn't mean that you can't turn it up. In fact, I encourage it. You gotta know how your mix is gonna sound at louder volumes, and in front of your clients, louder is better. There's a time and a place for loud, as long as it's short, spaced out, and intentional. Mixing quietly isn't just for protecting your ears. If you're having trouble finding the right volume for your lead vocal, try turning the volume way down to where it's almost hard to hear. Then increase the vocals until they're just poking out and you can make out the words. This will make for a great starting point. You can also try this by taking off your headphones and listening to them from a few feet away. This will get rid of the low end that might be distracting you and masking your sense of where everything sits. Alright, that's my segue into mixing tips. This one is huge, and it's something I hear sometimes that drives me up the wall. You know those people that won't learn theory because Kurt Cobain didn't learn theory and it's gonna hurt their creativity? I could write a book about why I hate this mentality, but people bring it into mixing way too often. Sometimes you'll hear an indie or a punk band say that they don't need a pro mixer master because it goes against their DIY ethos, that it'll sound overly produced or too clean. Listen to me when I say this, not mixing your DIY punk band won't make it sound more DIY and punk. It will make it sound bad. A good mix engineer is not going to try and take a rough, edgy song and turn it into Steely Dan. They're going to enhance the pre-existing qualities of your recording. In fact, they might make it rougher and edgier, but in a way that is tasteful and informed. This doesn't mean that you have to hire Serban Gania for your punk tune. I just mean to clarify that mixing is not some technical voodoo that some nerd does behind the scenes. It's an artistic process closely tied with the creation and emotional impact of the song. If everything is stereo, nothing is stereo. This is a mixing lesson and a life lesson in one. Everything is relative to something else. Things are only loud compared to something quieter, only bright compared to something darker. If you keep slapping wider plugins on individual tracks because it sounds better when you listen in solo, you're gonna have a weird, hollow mix with no impact. Be intentional with what's in the center and what's on the sides. I always think it's cooler when there's two different textures panned left and right that balance each other out, rather than taking one texture and smearing it across the stereo field. Check your mixes with the stereo image flipped. Visual artists do this all the time because they get used to seeing their composition in a certain way. Flipping your mix resets your perspective and highlights potential panning issues. Close your eyes while listening for a free 25% performance increase. If it doesn't sound good on AirPods or a phone speaker, it's not a good mix. Watch these guys' YouTube videos. Alright, these are going to move into the more production and recording side of things now. The The hierarchy of things that people actually care about is as follows: vocals, then drums, then bass, then everything else. Sample libraries are great, but never as cool as recordings. If you can't get a recording, at least try to play in your samples by hand. But even if you don't play it in by hand, sample libraries are still always better than AI. AI detracts from your humanity and poisons your art. If you feel the need to use AI for anything, it's a sign that you should practice more, or make more connections with other artists. And the people who make excuses for why they need it are losers. Being in tune is more important than being good at your instrument. There's always something special about the first take. Never delete it. The philosophy of get it right at the source isn't just to save time, it's also what sounds the best. If you want a dark vocal, it's gonna sound better to use a dark mic rather than a bright one that you'll EQ later. However, the best mic is the one that's closest. Make decisions, make commitments. The idea of leaving everything open and fixable and changeable is exhausting. You don't need to do a shootout between 4 different vocal mics and then stress over which one's gonna sound the best. Trust your judgment and make a decision. Sometimes better safe than sorry can become better safe than anything at all. Keep a nail clipper by your desk. If you play bass, guitar, or piano, you don't want to have to run to the bathroom when inspiration strikes because your fingernails are ruining your ability to play. Don't listen to Davey 504, pick on bass rules. Guitar picks matter, they will change your sound, try as many as you can. Drumsticks matter, they will change your sound, try as many as you can. Never have only one pair of drumsticks, but I'm breaking this rule right now because I can't afford any. Cheap cymbals sound like garbage. Cheap drums can sound amazing. Buy good drum heads and learn how to tune them. When setting levels before recording, ask the player to play the loudest section of the song. Then assume they'll play it much louder. Take pictures of everything. Mic setups, cable routing, hardware settings, all of it. You never know what you might want to reference later. However, recordings on different days are always going to sound a little different. One of my professors in college, Royish Good Looks, gave me this piece of advice. Save gang vocals for the end of the session. Sometimes by the end of the day, it's been hours since some band members have done anything. Ending the session with something fun and lighthearted like group chants or cheers is a great way to get everyone working together and laughing right before they head out. It'll have everyone leaving the studio in a good mood with a good impression of the day. After everyone's gone home, it's your time to color code and name everything. You'll regret not doing it when you open up the session a month later. Gear does matter. Anyone who says it doesn't may have good intentions, but I think that phrase is potentially dangerous and should be reworded. I don't know, there's something funny about professionals sitting in studios surrounded by thousands of dollars worth of premium equipment, preaching about how none of it matters. If that was true, they wouldn't have bought it. The mic you use, the instruments, the plugins, it's all directly responsible for the sound you're gonna end up with. And that's something you should embrace and be proud of. If all you have is an iPhone to make your record, you might end up with a really cool vibe that sounds more interesting than a super pristine studio recording. Because gear matters. But if you're chasing a sound that you can't currently obtain, sometimes it's not because you haven't worked hard enough. If some kid only has a $15 mic and wants a pro vocal sound, telling them that gear doesn't matter and that it's all about their skill is just gonna make them think that it's their fault. Instead, I would encourage them to get the best sound they can out of what they have available, but also to manage their expectations. My own recent example would be the hollow body guitar and bass sound. I was lucky enough to have access to great solid body guitars, but on certain records, I wanted that distinctive hollow body sound. And I tried all sorts of tricks to EQ and manufacture the hollow body vibe, but you know what finally got me the sound? Getting the hollow bodies. The important thing is that you don't let these limitations stop you from creating. You have to embrace the gear you got and earn your upgrades as you go. Sometimes you don't have a choice. You gotta think like, this project will sound like this set of gear I currently have, and then maybe the next one will sound different when I get different gear. If the Beatles heard that the Beach Boys had an 8-track recorder and they waited until they had one too, there would be no Sgt. Peppers. When you see other people with fancy gear, it's very likely that they didn't just buy it for the sound. For instance, I like using analog gear, and even though I think it sounds great, the thing I like most is the ritual. And some people buy vintage pieces because they're valuable investments that become more expensive over time. Sometimes it's just for the prestige or impressing clients, or they just think it's neat. Buy used gear. Check Facebook Marketplace, Reverb, and eBay. Just use caution, there are scammers out there. Do not leave your gear in a car. Number 1. Never leave a guitar in its case with the latches unbuckled. Number 2. Never assume the person before you followed rule number 1. The proper way to lean guitars against a table is string side down. I know it feels wrong, but really you shouldn't be leaning your guitar in the first place. Leave space behind your desk if you can. It's better for acoustics, but more importantly, you won't have to crawl underneath your desk to access your cables. Being able to just walk behind my desk to make changes has been such an upgrade. If you use a desktop computer, invest in an uninterrupted power supply, or UPS system. If the power goes out or if your computer gets unplugged, the UPS will automatically power on and has enough battery in it to allow you to save your work and shut down your system properly. Of course, if you have a laptop, everything else in your setup might power down, but at least your computer will keep going on battery life. Gorilla Tape and mounting tape. It is way cheaper to get a pro headphone setup than a pro speaker setup. Speakers are good to have even in a budget setup, but they will not be reliable for mixing until you've spent a ton of money. Even then, there's no guarantee. A decent set of cans and maybe a dedicated headphone amp will be much cheaper and very reliable. But if you're trying to create a speaker setup for mixing, you should build your own acoustic treatment instead of buying it. I built these 6 giant bass traps for a third of the price it would have taken to buy them, and they work amazingly. If you're trying to treat your room for mixing purposes, that Amazon acoustic foam won't do anything. If the bulk of your treatment is under 4 inches thick, it's only going to absorb the high frequencies in your studio, leaving you with a dead top end and an unaffected low end. However, if you get some quality foam made from a dense material, absorbing some top end can be beneficial for recording. For instance, I use some in this hallway because it reduces the flutter echo that you get from parallel surfaces. I'd rather record vocals in a room treated with acoustic foam than a room that has flutter echoes. But if you were thinking about buying the cheap foam stuff to make your speakers sound better because it's all you can afford, then refer to this piece of advice. Way cheaper to get a pro headphone setup than a pro speaker setup. Soundproofing is not the same as acoustic treatment. Soundproofing usually means construction. Acoustic treatment really only affects the sound within your room, which is important, but it will not stop the sound from reaching your neighbors. The best you can do is make sure all holes are sealed, such as using weatherproof insulation in the windows and doors. Get a screwdriver set like this one. This mouse is great. It's the Logitech MX Master Mouse. For traversing a DAW, I love having 2 scroll wheels. Not sponsored again, I just like it. Field recorders are great. Just make sure you format your SD cards before important recordings. Lava lamps are great. Level is volume. Gain is a positive or negative change in volume. Learn about latency. Know which plugins introduce latency, how your DAW deals with it, and how to minimize it. Learn about routing, groups, and sends. Generally how your DAW sends audio around. It's simpler than you think and is completely necessary. Pick your DAW based on how it makes you feel, not which one has the best features. Really, they all do the same thing, so you should use the one that makes you feel the most comfortable, whichever one you like the vibe of. Industry standard doesn't mean anything. All the top mix engineers don't use Pro Tools because it's the best DAW. They use it because it's the first DAW, and they switched to it in the 90s. It's safe to assume that other things considered industry standard might share a similar story. Never buy plugins full price, unless it's Valhalla. These next tips are a little less technical and more on the philosophical side. If you want to get better at guitar, leave it outside of its case and close to where you spend your time. Even better, leave it plugged in. Even better than that, use my Father and I's app standalone, so all you have to do is push a custom hotkey to unmute your guitar amp plugin and play your guitar immediately. If you want to get better at harmonies, start trying to sing harmonies to every melody you listen to. A couple years ago, I couldn't figure out harmonies for the life of me. I started doing this, and now I can improvise harmonies on the spot. A side effect is that you will start unconsciously singing harmonies to every song that's playing and sound like a theater kid. To all the producers watching who make music entirely on the computer, that's great, but you gotta move air. It's a sacred part of music. Music is frequency and vibration, and that doesn't exist until it's out of the computer. Record a shitty vocal on your phone and put effects on it, or use your dorm room as a weird room reverb. Sample a doorknob and use it as your snare. Something that makes your production a capture of vibrations that you put into the universe. A lot of, and in some cases most of the streams you see other artists getting are botted. Not me though, I got real fans, but keep your expectations in check. Most singing you've ever heard in your life has been pitch corrected. Not me though, I don't use pitch correction, but keep your expectations in check. Some language is a dead giveaway of inexperience. This is a kick drum, not a bass drum. Any audio related cable is a cable, not a cord. Autotune is the T-Pain effect, pitch correction is more natural sounding and usually undetectable to the untrained ear. We usually say low end instead of bass to not confuse it with the bass instrument. Don't call anything warm, it's like calling whiskey smooth. Saying the word tracking instead of recording will make it sound like you know what you're talking about. Same for the word bounce instead of export. Don't over-listen to your own demos. Of course it's great to check your songs in the car or on the portable speaker, but every time you listen to your song, you are losing perspective and training your ear to accept the problems. This can lead to demo-itis. You are never too old to learn anything. My last piece of advice is that everyone on the internet loves to hand out unqualified advice. If you guys have any questions for me, please leave them in the comments. I think I want to do a Q&A type video soon, and it's pretty likely that I could feature your comment in a future video. That's all for now. Take care.